on Straight Talk Africa, fresh off a two-nation visit to Zimbabwe and Malawi, Shaka will talk about the people he met in the political landscape in the two southern African countries. Together with my VOA colleague Paul Ndiho, they observed and reported on the election process in Zimbabwe. Shaka, afterward, traveled to Malawi where he interviewed Vice President Saul Shilima and former President Bakil Muluzi. That's coming up next, right here on Straight Talk Africa. Hello, welcome to Straight Talk Africa live from the Voice of America headquarters in Washington. I'm Peter Clotte. Today we are talking about Shaka Sali's two-nation visit to Zimbabwe and Malawi and the political landscape in the two southern African countries.
On a South African airliner much like this one, Shaka and I left from Dallas International Airport outside of Washington, D.C. on the evening of July 17th. It was a tremendously exciting, rewarding, productive and tiring trip. We started out in Zimbabwe, where Shaka moderated the hugely successful and widely attended first ever presidential debate in a post-Robert Mugabe era. The television, radio and internet broadcast was co-produced by the Voice of America and the rising Zim Papers television network. We covered political rallies for both the leading opposition party, MDC Alliance, and the ruling party, ZANU-PF. The general elections to elect the president and members of parliament were held on July 30th. On election day, Shaka visited different polling stations to witness the voting process, which was mostly peaceful. Journalists and observers were granted access to polling stations. However, deadly protests broke out after supporters of the opposition felt that the preliminary election results announced by the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, ZEC, did not reflect their own exit poll tallying. But the final election results show that incumbent Emmerson Mnangagwa won last month's presidential election with 50.8% of the vote, while Nelson Chamisa of the MDC Alliance trailed with 44.3%. The opposition alleges that the figures were manipulated. I met with a Citizens Manifesto, a non-partisan coalition of young Zimbabweans representing various constituencies, civil society, faith-based organizations, youth and women who want to see a better Zimbabwe. My next step was Impact Hub Harare, a co-working space where change makers, social disruptors, impact innovators, and entrepreneurs interested in solving everyday problems gather to see their startups launched. From Zimbabwe, Shaka traveled to Malawi, and his first stop was meeting Malawian journalists and a meeting with the former official hostess of the late Malawian president, Kamuzu Banda. Shaka also had a one-on-one with former Malawian president Bakil Muluzi in Blantyre. Muluzi served as the first freely elected president of Malawi from 1994 to 2004. As Shaka would say, Muluzi is retired but not tired. He is involved with many charitable organizations. Shaka also conducted an exclusive interview with Malawi's Vice President, Saul Shilima, who has expressed her interest in running for the president in next year's election. Shilima, 45, a former chief executive officer of the mobile network operator Airtel Malawi Limited, left the ruling Democratic Progressive Party last month, saying that corruption in the government is at all-time high. We'll have more of Shaka's interview with Shilima on an upcoming episode of Straight Talk Africa. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
Thanks, Paul, for that report. Today we are joined in the studio by the longtime host of Straight Talk Africa, Shaka Sali, my colleague reporters Paul Ndiho and VOA Zimbabwe reporter Chris Gandhi. Welcome to Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much. I have to say, frankly, that you've done a great job holding the fort while some of us were back on the mother continent.
Thank you, thank you. So let me ask you, Shaka, how was the experience in Zimbabwe, particularly before the elections?
Incredible, because some of us had never actually been to Zimbabwe. The only way we had been there, if I might say so, is through the media, so to speak. That is the only way we had access. And frankly, Paul and I couldn't believe that we happened to be in the Zimbabwean capital of Harare, which, by the way, is like a Swahili word, meaning it never sleeps. It's just like New York, Manhattan.
Right.
Now, it's interesting I say that because, frankly, the language they speak, especially Shona, and the language they also speak in neighboring Malawi, you can't believe it's just like Chinyarwanda, partly Chinyarwanda, partly Luganda, partly Kiswahili rolled into one. Some of the adjectives, in fact, they are pretty much similar, mean the same thing. You can't believe that people actually had to walk from present-day Cameroon, and those people are called Bantu, and they pretty much populate the southern part of the African continent. Now, when I looked at Zimbabwe, honestly, I said, no, this cannot be a country that I understand and that I know has actually undergone Western social, economic sanctions, virtually ostracization, so to speak. And yet, things seem to be normal to me. The city was pretty much clean, very, very clean. As a matter of fact, Harare, incredibly well planned, much planned than some of the cities I have seen elsewhere in Africa, including the Great Lakes and what have you. Harare, is a big player. And people were dressed nice, very warm. People were driving the latest series of whatever is, whether it is a Mercedes, whether it is a Hummer, whether you name it and stuff like that. You can't believe it. I couldn't believe that I was, in fact, in Harare. Very peaceful, very warm, except, of course, as Paul indicated in his package, Wednesday, August the 1st. And in fact, that was the day that I was accompanying him to the Robert Gabriel Mugabe International Airport to, come back to Washington. That's when, of course, supporters of the opposition, especially MDC Alliance, Nelson Chamisa, they basically felt that they should be able to exercise their constitutional right, which is peaceful, sort of protest, if you will. But unfortunately, the state seemed to be in panic mood to the extent that they didn't feel comfortable having the police, for example, using water cannon and tear gas.
Right.
But instead, they actually, in addition, deployed military with live ammunition.
That was an unfortunate incident. Let me come to you, Paul. How was your experience in Harare and the other places you visited in Zimbabwe?
I was particularly impressed by the whole place. For example, the city, like Shaka mentioned, is very, very clean. The people are very disciplined. I've not been to an African city or country where people observe simple traffic rules. I was incredibly impressed by that. Not only that, the people are very cultured. They're very disciplined in a sense that they respect people. When they are talking to you, especially ladies, they even courtesy. I had the pleasure of being courtesied at almost every. I became a prince of some kind. So I found that to be very, very interesting. But as far as the elections were concerned, I thought that maybe I'll use a Hollywood analogy here. I thought that President Emerson Mnangagwa, General Chiwenga put a show for us. There was no police presence on the streets at all. No. The first 2 weeks that were there, zero police presence on the streets. Police showed up on the day after, on Wednesday, August 1st. That was when everything started happening. But before that, people would just stop at traffic lights, cross the street, cars go by, and nothing was happening. So I felt like they put on a show, and that show was co-produced by both men and produced by the EC chair, the lady who counted the votes.
Let me come to you, Chris. You reported on the instances that led to the violence and before that.
Yes.
What caused the fracas? Because, as Shaka pointed out, it was peaceful. Some observers described the election as smooth. And then there was a delay somewhat in the announcing the presidential election, which most people thought was the main focus of the election. For the parliamentary and all that, they didn't much pretty care about it. They were focused on the presidential vote.
Yes.
Why the delay, and what culminated or what necessitated the violence in the first place?
Basically, I think the delay, the so-called delay, because according to the laws of the country, the results are supposed to be announced within 5 days. And they were still within that 5 days. But what led to most of the people to start, getting impatient was the fact that the first 2 days or so after the election, the results were almost known because almost all the polling stations had, brought in their tallies. So it was just impatience because there was still time for the officials to make the announcement. And also to note is that, the opposition itself is saying that they were not responsible. So it was just a spontaneous kind of, reaction.
But who deployed the military? Because I understand,
yes.
I understand the police were overwhelmed by the upsurge of so-called violent demonstration from the mass population.
Like Shaka pointed out earlier, it wasn't, I don't think they were overwhelmed. I think it was an overaction. The head of the police himself said, according to the constitution, we are allowed to call in the army. And that's what they did. But as far as I could see, I think they could have, used water cannons, tear gas, and they could still have contained the crowds. But for them to use live ammunition, it's really, even the government itself has said that they were not responsible for that. So
well, they have called for an independent investigation into what happened and all that. But Shaka,
investigation manned by who?
That's a good question.
Are they going to be the judge and jury?
Well, it looks like it. My question is, Shaka, Nelson Chamisa and the MDCT Alliance have filed a petition in court officially challenging the outcome of the presidential election particularly. Realistically, what do you think the prospects are of them winning a favorable outcome from the court?
First of all, you really have to go back and look at the political history of Zimbabwe as we know it. You have to ask yourself whether, in fact, they do have institutions that you would actually classify as independent.
Right.
Are they independent, in fact? Now, we also have to look at the fact that last year you had the military supporting, of course, then Vice President Emerson Mnangagwa, who is referred to as the crocodile by some people. They did something very historic. What does it really mean, historic? I'm talking about removing the founding Prime Minister of independent Zimbabwe on April 18, 1980. This man was removed from power. Not so many people, frankly, thought that this man would actually somehow be outside of power, other than, for example, if you had some kind of divine intervention, because he had defied a lot of odds to the extent that almost everybody had given up, and saying that they're going to be under President Mugabe until, divine intervention or whatever. And so these people who were behind that process, I think one would have been naive, politically at least naive, to think that these people sincerely, at the end of the day, would find some very solid democratic credentials that gave them the confidence that, in fact, you could have a political terrain that would provide an election that would be free, fair, transparent, credible, and verifiable. I was not one of those optimists. No, sincerely. But even then, I also probably don't really have the facts on my fingertips, because I was not able to move away from Harare, the capital. Most of the information I had about, and we were talking about 10 provinces or something, were really through the media, through people and what have you. And frankly, it looks like ZANU-PF still commands respect, especially in rural areas where people may have benefited from some land, maybe land deals or what have you, and food and you name it. But then again, to tell you the truth, I mean, from my vantage point in the city, you expected that people would be voting for change because you're talking about a country where unemployment, you're not just talking about statistics here, you're talking about, is it 95% unemployment? And you're talking about a country whose majority obviously is a reflection of the changing demographics.
Right.
So there's no way those people, frankly, would be voting for continuity. But then again, you never know. Now you're talking about ZEC. Some people, of course, say ZEC is not sufficiently independent as an institution, just like a lot of other institutions in the country, which is pretty much really the reflection of the African continent. Very, very few countries, frankly, today, including your country, probably could claim to be, you know, politically mature to the extent that even incumbents can, in fact, get into the business of organizing and holding an election that they are actually willing to lose.
Right.
Concede defeat with grace, just like John Dramani Mahama did in Ghana. There are not many places that you can really expect that. So I'm not surprised that we are pretty much where we are. And then about the police. I was talking to some supporters of ZANU-PF, and they frankly said, to be honest with you, I said, why didn't you let the police do its job? You know, they said, you see, when you look at the manner in which, for example, the current people in power took power, they did not have a reason to trust the police. And so they didn't really give the police the benefits of the doubt, because you know as well as I do that the head of the former police, I think, was retired, and there are other people that have essentially been removed from office and what have you. So they did not really feel comfortable with the police. That's why they called in the military. As a matter of fact, a lot of observers say it's not just the military, it is one of the vice presidents, who happens to be General Constantino Chiwenga.
Who did it?
Who did it? That's what I say, but there's no evidence.
Right, right. Paul, let me come to you before we go to a quick break. What was the experience like? You went in the street, you spoke with Zimbabweans. At some point, they were even complaining about no cash in the system. Tell us about the experiencing the Zimbabwean election.
You know, as I was listening to Shaka, one thing that came to mind was Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin once said that it doesn't matter how many people show up to vote, but what matters is the person who counts the vote.
Right.
And that statement could not have been true in the Zimbabwean context. You had a lot of people. We talked to a lot of people on the streets. Everybody was for change. The fact that you could walk to an ATM or go to a bank and you can't withdraw money. Young people all over, they are not employed. Everybody that we talked to said, look, we are expecting change. This is the first time in the history of Zimbabwe that we are voting for change. And I didn't see that reflected in the results that were announced by the ZEC in Zimbabwe.
I think you are being a little bit over there, Paul, because in fact, even some of the supporters of ZANU-PF, in fact, they said they were actually voting for change. And the catchword here is that for the first time since April 18, 1980, guess what? The name of Robert Gabriel Mugabe was not on the ballot.
And for them, that was
change. All right, we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back. You are tuned into Straight Talk Africa. We'll be right back.
Today's youth are not just the next generation of African leaders, they are today's leaders. And this is the time to invest in them. Today, not tomorrow. So let's connect. Let's engage with each other on issues that will transform our societies. innovation, leadership, entrepreneurship, things that you're doing to move the continent forward, to make you the greatest generation that Africa has known. It's Up Front every Wednesday, 17:30 UTC, right here on the Voice of America.
Welcome back to Straight Talk Africa. Chris, let me come to you. Before we went on that short break, we were talking about the experiences of Shaka and Paul during the Zimbabwe elections. Some people were saying that the opposition focused their entire campaigns in the main cities, Bulawayo, Harare, and the rest. You know, forgetting that the rural vote counts. What happened?
Yeah, but it's not exactly like they concentrated in the cities, because for the first time we saw them gaining some, support in the rural areas, which were sometimes considered no-go areas. But this time they managed. And when they went there, in some places, the crowds were so unbelievable. That was in the rural areas. So when you look at all this, I think you have to understand that the people, even in the rural areas, they wanted change, like what my colleagues are saying. But somehow, maybe let me bring you back again, because these guys went this time and they thought, what they saw was, going to force people to vote for change. But we have seen worse. There's been worse times than what you have seen. There's been nothing in the shops during the time of President Mugabe. And people, surprisingly, you would see all that poverty, nothing in the shops, no money, the inflation shooting to thousands, but people going to vote for Robert Mugabe. That has happened before. So for now to say this appeared worse than it, this has been nothing. So I really don't understand how, you can base your assessment on the situation as it happened, as you guys saw it. Because there's been worse times, but people still have not changed the government.
But Chris, okay, before you come in, Shaka, Chris, were you satisfied with the outcome of the election? And do you think that Zimbabweans repose confidence in the way the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, or ZEC, administered the election in a free, fair, and transparent manner?
As far as the election itself, I'm sure you have heard even the observers, most observers say, the period before and during the election was peaceful, it was quiet. But of course, there are these questions that have arisen because of the petition that has been lodged by the opposition. So until we hear exactly what the opposition has, then we can make a fair assessment of whether it was free and fair. But as far as anyone could see, everything appeared, normal. I don't know how you guys saw it. So it's now, like you said, the Stalin example, where it's now in the counting, where we are not sure what was really happening. Because the ZEC itself has actually admitted, the commission has admitted that in some cases there were some human errors. So we don't know how far those human errors were. Were they widespread to discredit the whole thing? We are still to see that in the courts.
All right, Shaka, you were about to say something.
I think that we really have to be very careful, especially when we start talking about how some of these opposition rallies, for example, in rural areas. I saw one, of course, a humongous, rally in the capital, Harare. But we also have to accept the fact that we don't know, for example, whether in fact those people are registered voters.
That's right.
And in fact, if they are registered voters, we don't actually know. We cannot prove whether in fact they came out the day of the voting and actually voted, quote unquote, wisely. So we really don't know.
That's right.
So perhaps I can add that from talking to some of the supporters of ZANU-PF, they told me off record that, look, our people put their lives on the line for this, to bring this election. We are not just going to give it away. And probably they were right, because when you think about what could have happened to those guys who led the coup, the situation could have been dire. But what they did, they put on a show, like I said earlier, for us, the international media, the international observers, to make sure that everything is smooth until the day of the election. In other words, in my view, what happened prior to the counting of the vote didn't really matter. It was just for show. What happened, what we should focus on is how the process was done after the election, the counting of the ballots. That's where the focus should be.
How it ended. So basically what you are saying is that whatever we saw, whatever we are part of, we are all just going through the motions.
Hollywood.
And what about the, you know, the judicial system? To what extent is it in fact independent, so much so as to probably actually come up with an independent decision? Is it quite possible that even the institutions themselves, all they can do, frankly, is take you through motions? Because let's face it, you do have 3 independent organs of government. You have the judiciary, obviously, which is headed by a Chief Justice, an incredibly well-educated individual and a good civil servant. And then you have the legislature, which is headed by a speaker. But is it quite possible that those 2 institutions, in fact, at the end of the day, in political reality, they may in fact be subordinate to the executive, which is headed by a president, Emerson Mnangagwa?
Yes, but you also have to note that of the 9 judges, 6 of them, I think, yes, 6, were appointed by former President Mugabe.
Right.
And now, if you look at Mugabe and President Mnangagwa, you know, they are not really in good books. So when you look at that, then these are the judges we might safely say pro-Mugabe and anti-Mnangagwa. I mean, we can put it that way.
But what would they benefit? What would they benefit from remaining loyal to a man who has been? I went to the Blue Roof, by the way, for example, following his address to the press.
Yes.
The state withdrew, I was told, security.
Security, yes.
So why would any judge even worry about his loyalty towards Robert Mugabe right now?
Maybe let me jump in here. I think really, and we've seen these examples all over across. The only country that I could say is an exception is Kenya, where the judges annulled the election. In other countries, it hasn't happened, and we are yet to see that.
They also annulled it, but what else did they do?
Yeah, I mean, what is important is we were able at least to annul that election. I think for Zimbabwe, what I can say, these judges are not about, and I could be wrong, are not about to annul this election after what they went through. I don't think they want everybody, even when you look at even the international observers, you look at the European Union, Britain, gave money to Mnangagwa, in a way endorsing him right before the election. So there was this semblance of accepting the guy as the guy who can lead this country to a better tomorrow, a better Zimbabwe. So I'll be surprised, I'll be shocked that the judges in Zimbabwe can annul this election.
But Chris, if I may ask you, Emerson Mnangagwa, before he was kicked out by President Robert Mugabe, was the right-hand man. He was the vice president, so he is not alien to these judges, as you clearly pointed out.
Yeah, he's not, but you know, the situation after Mugabe was kicked out has changed. They were comrades, they were, you know, but the situation thereafter, Mnangagwa has tried, you know, to accommodate Mugabe. You know, there's a lot of things he could have done or said. Remember, even the poison, when he was allegedly poisoned, all that was just put aside. You know, I don't know how he has managed to sort of, you know, just say to Mugabe, you know, he's just an old man. The other time he was saying, you know, let's just forgive this man because, you know, he's old and some of the things maybe he just said and he's not serious about that. But we know very well that Mugabe himself is really bitter. Mnangagwa has tried, you know, to play ball with him, but Mugabe on the other side, and most of his supporters, you know, some of them tried to form another splinter party, you know, ZANU-PF party. They didn't do very well. But you can feel that there is tension between these two.
A reminder that we'll appreciate all the audience feedback. Straight Talk Africa streams live every Wednesday on Facebook, and you can also watch us live on your mobile device. Just download the VOA mobile app. Now let's look at what's on tap for next week's program.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, VOA presents a town hall special, Martin Luther King, a global vision for justice. Dr. King is an American civil rights icon, but his influence extended far and wide, especially in Africa. Join us as VOA and American University team up to explore the conscious connection between Dr. King and African leaders on the next Straight Talk Africa, live from American University in Washington, D.C.
Today we are talking about Shaka's two nations visit to Zimbabwe and Malawi. Together with VOA reporter Paul Indiho, they observed and reported on the election process in Zimbabwe. Also with us today is VOA Zimbabwe reporter Chris Gandhi, who was there for the elections. Now, Shaka, after visiting Zimbabwe, you traveled to Malawi, where you interviewed Vice President Saul Shilima and former President Bakil Muluzi.
I gather that you have decided that you would like to be the occupant of the highest office in the land come next year.
Yes, but perhaps to say that the people have said so and have agreed.
In what way? Has there been a referendum or something of that sort?
No, not a referendum, but they've been calls by different people for me to participate. So I've said it's fine. I'll respond to their call very positively and participate in the race next year.
If I understand you correctly, Mr. Vice President, are you saying that this was not your initiative, but rather that, in fact, you reacted or responded to people who drafted you?
Yes. It's true that I personally had no intentions to contest, but people saw certain qualities in me that they thought qualified for the top office. And you know, the calls have been going on for the last couple of months.
Let me come to you, Shaka. You conducted an interview with Malawi's Vice President Saul Shilima, who expressed interest in running for president in next year's election. Now, the president fell out with the vice president. This is not the first time that you've had a vice president falling out with the president. It happened with Binguwa Mutharika, the elder brother of the current president, Professor Arthur Peter Mutharika, who fell out with Kassim Chilumpa, then fell out with Joyce Banda, who he chose as his running mate for the second term. Now, his younger brother, who was the foreign minister, now the president, Professor Peter Mutharika, falling out with his vice president, Kassim Chilumpa.
Is this deja vu?
Interesting. So what was your take when you interacted with him?
Well, first of all, to be very honest with you, I have to tell you that the man is incredibly popular. A lot of people told me he is the man to watch come May next year. I found him an incredibly, of course, intelligent man, a man who combines, of course, his time in the public sector. Essentially, he's a businessman, and he's also under some experience as a politician. He's incredibly, I have to say, very accessible. He's a man who listens very much, a man who obviously exudes, I must say, humility, just like a lot of his compatriots. I have to say that I found Malawi a very incredibly interesting place. I wouldn't mind really living in Malawi. And of course you can see the shirt I'm wearing here. This is with the love from the people of Malawi.
That's right, that's right. So, Shaka, let me ask you this. the vice president said corruption in the present administration has reached an embarrassing level. He has also demanded an independent investigation into all state institutions to ensure that graft is weeded out. Now, officials of the Malawi administration say, including Nicholas Dausi, the information minister, said he should resign if he is in the boat accusing the team that he is playing with of being corrupt.
As a matter of fact, I asked him the very interesting question. I said, look, you've been part of this government. If there was corruption and what have you, you should probably feel very comfortable also taking credit, because let's face it, what did you know about corruption and when did you actually know it? You know, and he danced around and stuff like that, just like all politicians do. But that's probably a very interesting question that he has to answer. But as you know, again, in Africa, for the most part, the watch, I mean, the buck stops with the president. The president, in most cases, is a presidential monarch, almost with absolute power. That is why, in fact, when in a lot of African countries there are elections, opposition parties don't pretty much care about members of parliament and what have you. They basically want to be the president, because the president seems to really have everything that one needs or requires in order to be powerful.
You know, Ndugu, aides of the president said that President Arthur Peter Mutharika gave Saul Shilima the chance to present the evidence he has about the corruption that is in the administration, and they've still been waiting. Now, Saul Shilima, the vice president, has gone on record to say he will name and shame at the launch of his new movement, that he will name and shame. They said they are still waiting for the naming and shaming of those who are corrupt in the administration. What is holding him back?
Well, I don't know. He would obviously be the best person to answer that question. But I have to say, frankly, that, look, time is on his side. Because let's face it, the government, in a way, has also not managed that issue of corruption well, because it reached a point where I think it's sort of admitted that certain things like that actually happened. And let's face it, when it comes to the bribe, or whether you call it a bribe, or money that went to the incumbent ruling party, for example, it is only one person, from what I saw, who was the signatory to it, and that was the person in charge of the political party, who happens to be also the president of the republic.
So Shaka, now looking at the political landscape in Malawi, I understand Saul's decision to launch his own party has disrupted the dominance of the DPP, the ruling party, the main opposition Malawi Congress Party, or MCP, led by Chakwera, and now he's like the new kid on the block.
He's the new kid on the block. I have to say, frankly, that I tried as much as I could, at least to have some access to the president. So I would have a chance to ask him some of those questions. But I was not able to do that. I was able instead to meet one of the most powerful presidential aides, a man that you know very well, and he knows you very well. By the way, you are an incredible star in Malawi. You just talked about with anybody who is who in Malawi. And frankly, you deserve credit, because let's face it, you're talking about Malawi, a country that is very traditionally conservative and very British. Where the BBC obviously is the radio of choice, or television and stuff like that, but your name is right there.
Thank you.
You've done a very good job. You have to be very proud of that.
Thank you.
And yes, I have to say that Straight Talk Africa is not a stranger in Malawi. So there were occasions, of course, when people wanted to take pictures with me and all that kind of stuff. They couldn't believe that I was on their territory. Yeah, I'm told that this man is very, very popular, especially tapping into what they characterize as disadvantages on the other side. You see, the president, almost like me, lived outside of his country physically for more than 40 years. And most of those years were in the United States and all that kind of stuff. And he seems to be sometimes uncomfortable communicating in the national language, Kichewa, I was told. I did not talk to him to find out exactly that, but that's what a lot of people talked about. And so probably it's quite possible that he may have problems, you know, somehow having unfettered access to the prospective voters in terms of how he's able to communicate his message. But on the other hand, I had him, you know, addressing a rally in Muzuzu, where in fact I wanted really to go because I wanted to see a very distinguished former professor at Makerere in English called David Rubadidi, the man that wrote a book that I really liked so much when I was a kid called No Bride Price. And he also has the privilege of having served his country as Malawi's permanent representative to the United Nations. First in 1964 when Malawi attained its political independence from Britain, and then he joined the rebels, those who were rebels supposed to be opposed to then strongman Malawian founding president
Hastings Kamuzu
Dr.
Banda.
Hastings Kamuzu Banda.
That's right. So, well, Shaka, you also conducted an exclusive interview with Malawi's former president Bakil Muluzi in the commercial capital Blantyre. Let's take a listen.
You had the dubious privilege or opportunity to demolish that life presidency. How did it feel, really?
Well, that's why if you ask me the question, what is it that you feel that you achieved? To bring democracy in our country, that makes me satisfied.
What would you say was perhaps the single most important decision that you made during your presidency?
The one that makes me very proud is to say, let us fight dictatorship to bring democracy. That's the one.
Well, Shaka, you spoke with the former president Bakil Muluzi right there. What were your impressions after speaking with him? Does he still matter in the political landscape in Malawi? Of course, his son, Atupele Muluzi, is the presidential candidate, although he's a cabinet minister in the current administration.
He's the cabinet minister, he's the minister of health, as a matter of fact, and he's very proud of the fact, at least from what he said to me, that he's able at least to provide service delivery to the Malawian people.
Right.
I have not done sufficient homework to find out whether, in fact, he's right. But it looks like, yes, he, of course, inherited his father's political party. And I had an occasion to attend one of the rallies where he spoke Kichewa. And I remember him saying, Zuka Malawi, Zuka, Zuka Malawi, Zuka. You know, in my mother's language, Zuka is almost like saying wake up,
right,
or rise up, you know, things like that, which pretty much means the same thing in the Kichewa in Malawi. You never know. There are rumors, for example, that he could probably, in fact, become the incumbent president, Professor Peter Mutharika's running mate, come election time next year. Who knows? He did not tell me that, but those are the rumors downtown Lilongwe and Blantyre.
Well, I understand with the UDF party, the party he inherited from his father, Atupele inherited from his father, Bakil Muluzi, that Bakil Muluzi still pulls the string in the party, and that since he is the kingmaker, he could call the shot because he happens to be a close friend or an associate to incumbent president, Professor Peter Mutharika.
I think like all former presidents, especially when they are still alive, they tend not to really unruffle things. They tend to be supportive of whoever is in office. And, you know, I think that Bakil Muluzi, at this point in time, doesn't see any particular reason, for example, why he would go out publicly against the incumbent president, Peter Mutharika. I think their relationship is very cordial. Very cordial, no question about it. And he even tried, actually, for me to access the president so that I could have an interview. But unfortunately, they found that the president's schedule was pretty much very, very tight.
Conflicting schedule.
Very conflicting schedule. So we probably may have an opportunity to host the president when he comes to the United Nations General Assembly next year. That is at least the sort of agreement that we have with your friend Bright.
Bright. All right. You are tuned into Straight Talk Africa. To participate in our conversation, please call us at 202-619-3111, and the U.S. country code is 1. We'll continue our discussion in just a moment. Stay with us.
The lyrics could be French,
English,
Portuguese,
Bantu,
Arabic.
It is the beat.
The African beat that counts.
The beat does all the translations.
It cuts across all languages and gives us the understanding that this is the African beat.
It is so distinct
and adhesive.
It binds us together.
African beat on the Voice of America. For more information, visit our website at www.voanews.com/AfricanBeat.
If you like today's show, please write and tell us what you think or give us some suggestions. Be sure to tell us what station you're tuned into. Our address, Straight Talk Africa, Voice of America, 330 Independence Avenue Southwest, Washington, D.C. 20237 USA. Or send us an email at africatv@voanews.com. Log on to our website at voaafrica.com. Or post your comments on Facebook. Keywords Straight Talk Africa.
Welcome back to Straight Talk Africa. Before we went on the break, Shaka, you were talking about your interaction with former President Bakil Muluzi, a prominent figure in Malawi. But did he speak with you about life after the State House, after serving his 2 consecutive terms in office?
Actually, to be very honest with you, most of the interview pretty much centered on that. And he said that he is very, very honored and pleased to at least the fact that the Malawian people gave him an opportunity to serve them. And he served them, he thinks, to the best of his ability. And that, you know, they have also in turn, of course, created the conditions that help him to enjoy at least life. He does not endure life at all. In fact, he told me he does not miss State House. He said during the period when he was in power, sometimes his blood, you know, the blood pressure, the temperatures would go up and all kind of stuff. He said that's the last thing that he can associate with anymore. He's a very free man, a very free spirit, and he's very popular. He's incredibly popular. In fact, a lot of people talk about him. He's a very pleasant guy, remarkably articulate, a man of the world, and a man who, in fact, suggests or at least advises some of his former, colleagues that they should feel very comfortable knowing that you were not born in the State House, and you should not necessarily wait to die in State House. You can, in fact, have a quality life after State House, just like him. And he's living in an incredible mansion, top of a hill, which gives you access to beautiful Blantyre. And he pretty much, helped us to be part of an exchange of social amenities. Very delicious beans, my friend, in that, life as for the State House. He said that he came to power, as you said earlier, in 1994, and he said some of the people that he found in power at that time, he actually left 10 years later, they are still in State House. He actually wonders what they think they're doing.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
Interesting. So what is he doing with his time now as a former president?
Farming. He's doing farming and a lot of other things. He's a man who, who people come to seek wisdom, advice, and so many different things. He's an incredible man. I really enjoyed every second of the moment that we shared with him. And he actually even invited me to go back in my personal capacity as the Cavalry Kid. And I certainly look forward to going to breathe the air, the Malawian, air.
Shaka, you interacted with a lot of journalists while you were in Malawi. Did they tell you what was going on in terms of how popular the current president is? talking about Professor Peter Mutharika and possibly his chances in next year's election, because he seemed to be getting attacks from everywhere, although he recently dismissed those attacks as just political imaginations from his opponent who want to make him unpopular ahead of next year's election and all that on the Malawi broadcasting platform NBC.
Well, yes, I interacted, you're right. I interacted with a lot of Malawian journalists, and they obviously had different points of views about the president, about the other contenders for the highest office in the land. But I don't think that I am going to be stupid enough to start talking about the president that I never met physically, when in fact I still have an interest in having an opportunity to interact with him. I think that you should wait for me to get the opportunity to interact with him and put that question to me. I will then be in a much stronger position to tell you what I think about President Peter Mutharika.
So how about the journalist you met? How was the interaction? Because in some of the articles that we read, you were encouraging them about they being sticking to their dreams and they can be whoever they want to be. Tell me about the interactions.
Well, it's pretty much really what I always share with African journalists whenever I have an opportunity, because I happen to be one of those beneficiaries of that particular experience. There's a saying that some people are self-made and what have you. I don't buy that. I think that we are all, in a way, individuals, frankly, who benefit from those people who came before us. They were very interesting, smart, kind, generous people who came before me, lent me their shoulders to climb on so that I can be able to see a little bit further than them. And because of that, I honestly feel that I have the responsibility of providing the shoulder of the cavalry kid to African journalists, young people, and what have you. Whatever they do, they can feel free to climb on my shoulders so that they can see a little bit further than Shaka. And in fact, they will be able to do that. They don't have just to be limited in the sense that they want to be like Shaka Sali. No. They can even be much better than Shaka Sali. And so that's pretty much the interaction that we have. And I told them, I said, you know what? Part of the problem, I think, why we don't go very far is because, first of all, we do not identify what we want. You should be able to sit down and identify what you want. Once you identify what you want, then the next task is probably looking for the appropriate tools that you need in order to navigate your journey, your struggle to where you want it, to take you. Those are the things that I talk about. And I said, look, you also can be the best that you can be. You do not necessarily have to compete against Peter Clote, about Paul Ndiho, about Chris. No, you can actually compete against yourself, so long as you make sure that the threshold is very, very high. Because if in fact you can attain that, if you can be the best that you can be, I can assure you that you do not have problems competing with anybody globally.
Before we go, Chris, let me come to you. Before the election, you had President Robert Mugabe, who was deposed, coming in to hold a press conference. I heard Emerson Mnangagwa's people were not particularly pleased with that. Talk to me about it, briefly.
Yeah, sure. It was like a surprise because earlier on he had not been, talking to the media. But all of a sudden, on the eve of an election, he comes up, and it was clear that he was trying to discredit Emerson Mnangagwa and, sway the vote to the opposition, which was really something which most people didn't expect because, he had been very hard against the opposition.
How did the Zimbabweans take it, hearing from him for a long time? Because the last time they heard from him, he was being pressured to resign live on TV.
Yes. Oh, Zimbabweans, they were surprised. They were really surprised that this man is just coming out and he's coming out to say something against his own party and in favor of the opposition. And some people actually think that discredited the opposition because now some people are saying, no, if we're going to vote for the opposition, it's just as the same as, voting for Robert Mugabe.
Before I found out is that it wasn't so much that he had the opportunity to address the press conference, really, but rather that he had the audacity, for example, to tacitly endorse Nelson Chamisa.
Yes.
So, Paul, how was the feeling when you were there, witnessing what was going on, the dynamics, looking at President Emerson Mnangagwa campaigning, and the fact that he's being hotly challenged at that time by Nelson Chamisa, a 40-year-old, and all that? Talk to me about it.
It was remarkable in a sense that Emerson Mnangagwa appeared to be human for the first time. We were used to seeing him as a guy who just came and took over power. So we had not seen that human side, him trying to connect with people. And by the way, he's not a great speaker, but he has that charisma. He's a very charismatic guy. He knows how to connect with ordinary people. And that's why, like Chris said earlier, he was able to gain a lot of support in the rural areas because people connected with him. Not particularly with his message, but they connected with the personality of Emerson Mnangagwa. And I think that's commendable on his part or his party that they were able to do that.
Well, Shaka, you attempted to speak with former President Robert Gabriel Mugabe. What happened?
And in fact, even incumbent president Emerson Mnangagwa.
Right.
And I had actually been given the green light to access both, but it never happened. And I think, frankly, what undermined it probably were the events of Wednesday, August the 1st. From that time, it didn't look good at all. Yeah.
Wow. But did they assure you that possibly in the near future you could have an opportunity to access both men?
You know what? I am one of those guys that for some reason I have come to believe that you do not count any chickens until they are hatched.
Chris, let me come to you. Before the election, during the campaigning, there were some bombs that went off. All kinds of allegations were made during Emerson Mnangagwa's campaign, the ZANU-PF campaign.
Yes.
What happened to people who allegedly were behind it, and have they been able to investigate thoroughly to find the masterminds or perpetrators? Although the allegations that some possibly members of ZANU-PF did it, factions of President Mugabe's people?
Yeah. Just last week, President Emerson Mnangagwa revealed that they have the names of the culprits and they're going to deal with them. He said deal with them. So we don't know whether they're taking them to court or the dealing part of it, but he says they have the names. So we're expecting to hear that after the elections, but maybe because of the court challenge now, we'll see, but that's what they've said.
Ndugu, briefly before we go, your thoughts on Zimbabwe?
Zimbabwe, I think that, I liked part of the historic event that I was part of. I think that we were really part of history. And I remember that yesterday I was asked by my colleague Paul, what kind of history are we talking about here, when a lot of people think that you basically were part of more of the same. I don't think it was really more of the same, because especially when you think about the fact that the name of Robert Gabriel Mugabe, for the first time, was not running for office. That has to be historic. Yeah. There's no question about it.
All right. On that note, our guests today were Shaka Sali, the host of Straight Talk Africa, VOA's reporter Paul Indiho, and Chris Gandhi. Thanks to our affiliate stations, along with our viewers and listeners. For many of our Voice of America radio affiliates, Learning English is coming up next. And tomorrow morning, it's Daybreak Africa with James Batty. Next week, Shaka returns to host our chair on behalf of the Voice of America. Thanks for tuning in to Straight Talk Africa, and have a great evening.